Okay, have you heard of the large chamber or void area that's been found inside the Great Pyramid? If not, I'll catch you up to par here in just a minute, but there's a new paper that's come out onto it, and it reveals more of a consolidated information on it and some things that really haven't been put out even by the media and so on. So I thought we'd get into this. There's also another void found on the corner of the pyramid, one would say somewhere around in here, of a little void that was found last year, and they even ran a camera off into it. I made a mention of it in a video whenever it came out, right whenever it did, excited me, but also I was sitting and waiting for somebody to come out with more or some more camera information or a second look on it or what they were doing, and there hasn't really been any of that, but you'll find that it attaches to this concept that I'm about to show you here. So if you're not aware, the pyramid has a place where it comes in and it goes down and then subterranean actually. And there's also another place where it goes up, but they call it the Grand Gallery. And it's quite vaulted in a corbelled ceiling that's much like the Kurgan burials that we were looking at before in the Scythians and so on, where they're slightly instacked on each other and eventually it seals off that cave idea rather than just putting a flat top. Although we do find arches and tops that are just angled much like a house roof that you think of today and other places, and above the Queen's Chamber and King's Chamber and all these other type of things. But there's another chamber that's been found on it, and it's actually directly above where we're at on that other Grand Gallery looking through here. And they found it through special equipment. So let's take a look at what they say here and try to get into this concept.
Secret chamber was recently discovered in Egypt's Great Pyramid of Giza. It's 100.
Scientists say that they have found a mysterious chamber hidden deep inside Egypt's Great Pyramid of Giza.
The journal Nature reports the 30-meter void deep within the pyramid is situated above its ground gallery and has a similar cross.
So you may be aware of this area that they found there, and what technology they use to find this is a Muon collector plate, which it's hard to describe all the way through it, what even I understand on it at this point, but there's something what you would think of like an X-ray plate. And there are X-rays, which are a fine ray that come through, and cosmic rays, but there are many different types. And this is a subatomic particle that actually passes through the earth and through all of us all day long. And people have measured this in many ways and found ways to collect it and use this in a way. And these people took a technology that they've used to try to do a Muon variant of ground penetrating radar for volcanoes, and seeing where there's a open void or there's liquid bubble up under there, concepts like this, if you follow me. And took the idea, well, it'd be real easy to use this if we just took it inside of a mountain like a volcano and we're able to look up with our equipment, because the muons trying to pass through the earth, very few do, whereas whenever the sun is facing us, we get a lot more through us, basically. Now these subatomic particles, and of course here they look like they're, Iron Man in the Fortress of Doom or whatever, and going through it here, but they're looking at it through 3D glasses, and this idea, and if you'll look at the picture on the right, you'll see that they show a slanted type concept that's been shown through one of these sets of collectors that they've gone, and from what I understand, they've done it with 3 different collectors and then a secondary type that was added in there, and by that they were able to correlate a whole lot more data and extrapolate what that is. But at this point they also don't know if it's an angular thing like on your right, are what the guy's pointing up here on the top mid left, to where it seems to be almost horizontal, versus that blue shaft that's running right down through there, that is that secondary shaft that we looked at. But you can see down at the bottom one too. But it looks like it almost runs parallel to it, or another shaft like that. But then there are other depictions, and depending on what angle they tried to get it from, it showed a depiction that may make it even more somewhat horizontal. And it's a huge chamber here. By huge, I don't mean the small capacity area that they found recently in the right hand side of the pyramid through the little porthole that we were talking about. But you can see him here pointing at this, and then he also points back at this other area that's on the right hand side, or the very bottom, or let me see if I can put my pointer here, down over here in this edge. And then if they have that area that's all been verified, they put a camera through it and so on, some 26 feet long if I remember correctly. Anyhow, it's an area that's a little chamber there, and no one really understands why that's even there. And I'm going to use it in a partial explanation of how the pyramids are built. And there'll be a guy that came up with this idea and stuff, but this chamber looks like it's just like the Queen's chambers he's pointing at here, and that causeway that comes up through there at the angle, but it seems to be directly above it in this area that's kind of light blue and giving off an anomaly here. You follow me? Well, it looks like this chamber here, down at the bottom, there's going to be a better picture coming up and I'll describe it again. But it seems like if you were to take from there and build a shaft just like the one that was done that leads in through it that he's pointing at, it would lead directly into it. So it's odd there's another shaft running through it. I've often marveled on the idea of how these shafts that people have seen are going through the pyramids and aiming at certain stars and so on. And to have built that, rather than taking the little cubits of the squares and stacking them all up, millions of them literally, and then to have something cut through there that they've even ran the little things up and stuff. They're blocked off somehow. There's all kinds of mysteries with that. But here comes another mystery on what's this huge chamber that's up above here that this guy's pointing at, and does it connect to it? You know, when we looked at the pyramid, and you can kind of see on the sides of the pyramid that they're actually a diagonal type line. I'll show that in a picture coming up. And they've taken different core samples and tried to check it out and realize that this wall is a facade of stones that are there, and it only goes a certain depth and so on. And there's all kinds of 2D and 3D results of this concept that goes on, where there's extra pockets in here and anomalies in the density of what's going on, so on like that, showing that there's extra chamber little ideas that show up. And indeed, we only found a few places that you could even crawl through and make it up, like say to the top of the Queen's chamber here and see. And of course that's where they found the ambiguous writing of Chufu that's there, and made the connection with that. Let's not get into that concept though here, but this grand gallery that's being shown here with its big blue blotch in the center of it, there's a bigger blue blotch than that blue blotch just above it that's an opening, and they detect the opening that we all know of that has the blue blotch in it now, and they're saying, yeah, there's something right up above it. And at first they said it was like 25-30 foot because some of the scattering and things like that, and this first idea, and this really wasn't the correlation of the data they've come up with now, for it appears to be about the same size, and it's some 40 foot. So quite a bit different than what was originally released and then speculated on by many people here. But if you look at the pyramid, I don't know if you can see it here, but the lines that are going diagonal, like say one that we can see pretty good here is the one that leads from here and it starts to go across. If you really try to look at that, it doesn't actually go straight across, but it's going up at some 7 degrees. And there's another one at this level here, and another one at this level here, and another one that's this level here. And then there's this weird notch of an area that's nowhere near as wide, and then another one that's there. Hopefully you can see those two that are right there together on that. Well, everything that we know of being internal to the pyramid is all below this point that I'm pointing at now, in the bottom level that's there. And it shows that they did something special whenever they started to cap it off and run up the rest of the top of the mountain. But this area that we're talking about here would have run up from this area, and if it's diagonal down, to about this area here, if you follow my pointer and the concept here of it diagonally being a vent that's running down. When I was a kid, trying to figure out, how they built the pyramids, and you'll hear something like that, and of course you run these things through your mind, and you don't know too much. But as I studied more and more about it, and you'd hear certain things and so on, and they didn't have the wheel, they only had sleds and everything, so they're dragging up inclines, and that the ramp that would have to have been made to end up going up to even like this area here, to only get it 3/4 finished without the top on it, like the back of a dollar bill, would end up being miles long, like 2 kilometers, over a mile long over here, and it would actually have more stuff in it than the whole pyramid has in it at the very end, and it's just unfeasible. And how did they do this? And when I saw those lines on there, it made me think, hey, that's kind of like a corkscrew, right? And then they could be using that, taking the sleds. And the old concept of Herodotus and others had said that they ended up using something like a shadoof, which, if you're familiar, is like the water device that they can dip down out of the Nile and up and cascade it into an area that'll flood their crops. And the back end of that has a weight on it, and the front end of it does too. So it's real light fronted, and you dip it in the water and fill it up, and then whenever you lift it up, all you're really having to lift is the difference between the weight that's on the back of it and the water that's in the front of it. So it's a whole lot less weight and easier to pick up. You can get more at one time. This is a machine of old. This is something quite amazing. It's just the concept of leverage, but you've got to realize we're looking at these people that are coming through the Neolithic times, and all of a sudden they're starting to create incredible things, and people still to this day are trying to claim, well, the aliens must have come down because wow, and so on. Well, truth is, I've shown you a lot of things, even those special bowls that are being built, that actually have a lineage and a history that'll go all the way back to like Göbekli Tepe and surely earlier. But what we're looking at here with that corkscrew idea is the idea that they could be pulling up in a sled around and around and around it. But that didn't make quite much sense. Well, then later, some 20 years ago now, some guy named Jacques Houdin, which I try to show you a picture of here later, ended up coming with the concept that it was an internal ramp, and that's what that little socket is over there that ends up having the archway on it, which has some writing on it, by the way, that hooks up to the ancient Aryans of India and Mohenjo-Daro and the language that was there, but let's not go there. There are 3 symbols above that most people don't try to even refer to. But they've poked through that now and realized, okay, well, that's a whole internal thing there, and it's been closed off now. But what was it used for? And still there's that question mark above. Well, that's just one of those levels these people are taking and going around, corkscrewing up this thing and lifting a stone to another level and around and taking them up to the top while building, which I think is just incredible that these people had an idea after just a few attempts at pyramids apparently here, looking back through it and the looking glass, had come up with this idea of while you build it, it builds itself, or it helps build itself, and the shape of it is what allows it to happen. It's the marvelous thing people can't figure out on how they built it. And you'll see still people with YouTube videos and throw stuff out there, and it's like, well, you haven't even seen any of this information or this information, or what about that Chufu thing where it shows this circular pattern? You're not even referring to that, but then lo and behold, here comes a UFO in the screen. Instead of crediting it to the amazing Caucasians that came together and formed it what it was. So, not only is this thing deep, running inside the pyramid and cutting up through there, but above that they have more. And when I was a kid looking at this idea, I'm like, yeah, that sure is a waste of space to have only used a certain amount of it and not have anything else. And you held these tales of the halls of Amenti and all these different concepts. But they found this, they used it with muography. So let's look into that. What that is kind of shown in your depiction here. They're cosmic rays that are passing through the planet. And then by putting something like an X-ray plate down below it, it'll collect them. And by putting them in certain areas and other areas, you can find, well, you know, this area shows that there's a big void above it, but these over here don't. Things along that line. You follow me? So these cosmic rays are passing all through us, like X-rays, if you will, constantly. Some of them are blocked by our magnetosphere and things like that, but this is the same type of subatomic particles pretty much that you'll find in the aurora borealis and things like that, only they're passing at near the speed of light, passing into our atmosphere, breaking apart from these primary cosmic rays into kaons and pions and other particles, and they break down into what's called muons. And when these things come through the planet, they get detected. Now you can see some of them come at some weird angles a little bit, but in general, they just keep putting dot, 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 dot. And so it passes through, it gives you an idea of density of things that are above it, and so on, right? And all I have to do is put these plates that they have here, and they line up these plates, which again are something like a X-ray type of thing. It's different, I know, but it's something like that. And by using that, they can detect them, and you come out with something which again looks like an X-ray, and you take a look at it, and they can see anomalies where there's this whole area that these muons more easily pass through all of this stone than they did over here, leaving you the concept of there's got to be a big void there. And this is easily tested, of course, because the grand gallery that they have today showed up on the other ones. And so they're like, okay, so we can easily detect that. There's something just like that here. Of course, with all the politics and BS that goes on with ancient Egypt and so on, everything's a slow crawl. But if they need something to help boost tourism and so on like that, they definitely will all of a sudden have people go looking in the right places, it seems, to find something and show you something else new, which is spurring more tourism, if you will. But looking at this, he's even pointing at this anomaly spot here they're looking at, and because they had all these separate plates and they're all vectoring on one single point, or they're detecting it in a broad swath across and only showing up in certain points, by triangulating that data here, and they even did it from inside and outside too. And this is totally non-invasive or whatever, other than the fact that they've got to lay these plates in the pyramid and so on. When these cosmic rays go through here, whenever they bounce through areas that have density to them, very few of them make it through, but other ones show up, and then it'll show up on their radiograph very much like this, and you can tell there's an anomaly there. The Queen's Chamber is right above you. Well, when you look at these other ones here, it looks like there's the Queen's Chamber and there's this other chamber that's on there too. And then by looking at it, you can actually say, you know, that thing's about 30 foot long at least. But then they triangulated and used math, computers, and so on, and took out these stray muons that have to be coming from oblique angles and concepts like that, if you follow me. and all of a sudden it showed up. No, it ain't 30 foot long. It's about as long as the whole Grand Gallery is itself. The only thing is the way we've placed them here with this angle, we get a hard idea of whether it's directly above it or if it's offset slightly, which is what they think. And then does it go all the way through to the top? And I'll show you some depictions coming up of what they think this actually looks like now. But they're using all this stuff, and again, from outside and inside, they can see that there's this void area here that shows up, and this new void. And again, this is something that they can use to depict the innards of a volcano. And of course, the pyramid looks like kind of like a perfectly squared up mountain volcano, but then it's got holes or openings in it, and if it does, it's going to show up pretty high, right? So they put these at certain places around in the pyramid as detectors, and whenever they do, they turn the thing on, let it wait for a period of time. I don't know how long actually that they did for each one, and if they tried different methods or whatever. It's kind of like a camera exposure time. But in doing so, they were able to pick up a lot of data off of these, and they could see where there were voids that we knew already. And if that's true, there are these other voids. And what's strange about it is there has been quite a few people who actually tried to discredit this, and that's crazy strange too. Here in these pictures that you can see here, there's this vent that's cutting in right up here at top, right above my pointer. Let me move that so it goes, and you can see that vent coming in, vent coming in, vent coming in. Even if we do it from the other side, same thing, vent coming in, vent coming in. What's that? And then this A anomaly here, which the A anomaly is showing you that there's a void that's built into that thing, and it's pretty wide, right? And so here's the void they already know, and there's a new void that's there. But with all of its anomalies, it's showing up to be somewhat bent at an angle. And there are people who have different depictions. The guy here, Ancient Architects, that I'm getting these pictures from, has his own little idea. We'll show that here shortly. But in this idea, these, cosmic rays come through like X-rays, and because of the voids that are there, it shows it up. And it's not so much a waste of space. Here they are doing it from the outside, and they're gleaning and looking up at an exact certain area here. So this is not something that can be taken to conjecture. They're looking above the one that hooks up to the Grand Gallery and so on, that's here going up. No, they're looking at this void that's above it. And it's where they found that extra void. That's what they're looking at here, that's over on the corner of it, showing you that it's got a vaulted ceiling here put over the top of it, but it only runs some 30 feet in there. And now that's been verified, right? We'll show you a couple pictures of the inside of that and so on, but that's been totally verified. So they go, well, you know what? That thing showed up something like this. What we're looking at up here is something that is much more huge than what we're looking at there. This is the depiction of a person being in there and how far they went back in there and what they saw in it. I'll try to leave the links to a few of the articles here that are about this, so you can take a look of it here. In fact, one of them I still need to read. I just got pretty excited putting two and two together here and thought I'd bring you a presentation here. But they went through a gap in these walls here, and here was the first look inside of the pyramid that no one had seen for over 4,000 years easy. And in this area, it's all smoothed off and an open area. It makes you wonder what that they did in this area. Well, this looks like this was one of those cornered in areas I was talking about the corkscrew building. And what we're actually looking at here is one of the corner turnaround areas that are built into the Great Pyramid. Although from the outside, it got closed off by a couple of sets of stones, whether there's a little socket inside of it or not. And then, of course, once they put the outside all on top of it, of that shinier, lighter marble stone or limestone that they used to have on it, then no one ever knew that these sockets were ever there or anything like that. It slowly unravels. But in finding this area here, it gave proof that this Muon technology totally worked, because they show it goes back about like this, it's about this size and so on, and it sure is. So whenever we see an area above the Grand Gallery that's the same size as it, that shows you the reality of what we're looking at here is something that's pretty huge. Well, now comes the other idea of, like, if we found a planet just like Earth not too far away, well then how do you get there? And how do you get there with these things that are here? How could you get up into that void? And it looks like this void here connects possibly with that other void, because it runs up, if it runs up just like the one below it, to the one above it. You follow me? And they're going to show you here with it slowly going to a horizontal effect, slowly going to that. And it could be both. It could be dipping down on the ground. Because I've said it before in a couple of my videos here, this is a machine that helped to build itself. And inside of it, if you have sleds that are put on that Grand Gallery with a huge stone on it that's about the same weight as the stone you're trying to drag up, all you really have to do is let that loose with ropes on it, going around a post, something as simple as that, that's able to handle the weight, of course, along with the ropes and everything. And then as you let that down, it automatically pulls it up for you. That's why in the Grand Gallery they have those notches that are along the side there that they tried to say was ancient statues or this, that, and the other was put there, but it was taken out long before they ever got there. Well, the strange, crazy thing about that is, I think whenever we got into it, we were supposedly the first people that did so, and there really wasn't anything in it. It was already empty. So it had to have happened a long, long time ago, and then had people actually build it over. Just like I talked about in the concept of an empty grave for Jesus, the reason that they have the empty grave that's right there in that sarcophagus area there, and that it's empty, is supposedly because he arose. It's like Osiris and the concept that went there. So if you came and then you saw, and then there's a crypt, but there's nobody there. Snow White's no longer there. She got kissed and woke up. The whole thing's, it's happened. It's a verifier in itself. Let's not get theological in that concept, but here's that area that's above it there. And so they're saying, you know, it could be sideways. And from one of the angles here they have, it actually goes all the way to that corbelling that's above the King's Chamber there, the one that you can get up and see the Cheops kind of concept idea. And again, they took these Muon detectors and went through, and you look from different angles. So they were quite complete in doing so, found this void, and here's the idea and the concept of, we know we're looking at that void, not the Grand Gallery, when we're looking from the outside, from G1 and G2, and these exact points that they're using, and looking up through the Grand Pyramid here and going, no, you know, there's an area that's right up in this area that has a big void in it. And by big, I mean as big as the void that's in the red line here. Denoted here by the plus marks that are on it, but it's more confirmed than that, actually. Now they've gone through the data more, and they've realized that it's a little more squared off. And then the concept is it the same angle, or is it really kind of sideways? Because one of the pictures here showed it definitely at an angle. One of the angles that they used show it's definitely coming over at the side, but almost attached to this corbel top area that I kept talking about here above this. And then from the other angle, it almost looks like it's not in line with that one, over at the side a bit. But then the main collector data shows that it's running down at an angle that's here. It's quite possible that what we have here, people, is both for the machine that would be using this, that slides things up and down, which we'll show you a picture of here in a minute, a concept, can easily be done in the next level. One would say, well, if you use that engine to get the pyramid built up to this level, you're not even quite halfway there. So to build the top half of it, you'd have to build another one up here, just like that. And if you look in this depiction over here on the right, we'll see that that's the pocket we just were looking at for finally after 4,000 years off into, that leads into there. What does that lead to? Well, if they took out a couple of stones in there or something, they might find that there's a path that's much smaller that leads up to it. And if they took the same concept that's down below, as above, so below, people, you would end up having something that looks exactly like it right above here. And then instead of having this King's Chamber in the way it's set up here, there appears to be something else, which if it was the same size would basically be running up right through the center of the pyramid, not offset a few feet like it shows here. Now there are ideas with this blurb, of course, that maybe it's 3 blurbs connected together by doorways and the walls are fairly thin, so it shows up as being one big blurb, or maybe it's this, or maybe it's that. And we have no way of finding it out until we actually try to find out actually. And we can triangulate these points that are on here and then get up over here and see how far we'd have to go through a rock to see what it takes to get to this point, to even see, well, if we can see anything or not. So it's a total validation, but then it's kind of like, well, what are we going to do now? Concept. But, well, the top half of the pyramid's actually made for something. Been a lot of people to try to discount this idea, like this guy David Ian Lightbody trying to say, well, you know, they want to just discount this idea of cosmic rays because around the Grand Gallery some of the stones didn't perfectly fit like what was shown in that one core sample, and because of that, that's probably what you're just looking at. And they're like, no, we're looking at it over here, it's different, and it's much higher up right there. So no, but it's crazy how anytime you come up with some idea like this, people want to discount it. Anything about Egypt really that ends up showing some radical technology that they had or a way of doing things is really hushed over. But then whenever you go to the Giza Museum and stuff and look around, it's all over right there in front of you. Just like whenever I show you, there's a lot of blonde people like Tuya and Yuya, I mean King Tut's grandparents and so on, Ramses, a redhead, and all these other people. It's not really referred to, they act ambiguous about it. Whenever you look into it, oh yeah, and if you look up blue-eyed Egyptians, they show you crystal blue-eyed statues of the time of the people building these pyramids. If you look up Himwenu, which they have a statue of, which is the great architect of the Great Pyramid himself, and you look at that, you'll see what you're looking at. And it's crazy they don't refer to it too much. But before World War II, they used to refer to it quite a lot, and it had it all figured out, but what they didn't have at that point was DNA and its verifiers, which when we've looked at what they've said about King Tut's DNA and all this so on, it really fits with it. And whenever in that paper that I showed you that hooked up to Egyptologist 7's presentation here, where a guy was trying to use a paper who says exactly the opposite to lie and say it somehow meant West Sub-Saharans were in Egypt, that it talked about a Nordic race of people here that had different type of skulls. That was the best thing they had going on before DNA. But now DNA stepped up to the plate and goes, well, it's King Tut's R1B. So what we're looking at here is the Nordics and Mediterranean Caucasians that ended up founding and going all through the whole run of ancient Egypt. And that's what's been kind of said all along, really. But people didn't like that idea if there was a European type people involved in it. That's like involved. It looks like they were the people that put it all together, the ones that took all 3 things and made the machines, the people that took and made these giant concepts that we still marvel over today. Like, how did they build something just so incredible like all of this? There's these muon detectors that are here, showing you these gaps in these places. And while there's this one little gap, which again I'm saying is totally validated now because they ran a little camera through there and there is a gap. Well, they say, well, there's this huge gap up here. It's much larger. Now, what it is some 16 feet by 16 feet by 40 meters long, or is it 16 meters by 16 meters by 40 feet long? So by putting these collectors all down through the Grand Gallery here, they ended up getting all this information here, and that was done kind of non-intrusive. And you can actually see some of that equipment on some videos from a few years back. This was started in 2016. These are through the times of 2017, 2018. And all these people trying to question it, all these concepts of where they're going at, which shows you, oh, no, listen, we know how to do simple landscaping, aiming, where we're going at, what we're seeing here. The data is pretty much pat. And it's really a gap that's over 40 meters long. And it looks to be the same size as the Grand Gallery. The thing is that some of them show it to be angled, like I just showed there, or if they show even right here, and some show them to be more flat out, or it could be a combination of both, depending on the angle that you're looking at. And what we're looking at here is two greats of Egyptology, or I consider them to be in the book, definitely. One on your left is Bob Breyer, known as Mr. Mummy. And he's done a lot of archaeology and actually made an actual mummy. He took a guy that was, well, paler than him. You can see he's got quite the tan on here from hunting around in Egypt all the time. But on his right side here is Pierre Houdin, and he's an architect who came up with the idea, which ends up being a culmination of putting a few things together and realizing with that corkscrew idea I talked about earlier is how they built the Great Pyramids. And Bob Breyer on the left took a guy like on the right that ended up passing away and wanted to give his body to science, and did so, and actually ran through the gambit of making him into a mummy. And the first thing that happened when he dehydrated is he turned into beef jerky and got real dark. But then they wrapped him with all the wrappings and things like that and went through the whole process. I think it's pretty neat. I've got an older video which actually shows it somewhat, but I only tried to show a few little snippets to see if they wouldn't block me from it because it's like a BBC thing. But here, Houdin on the right hand side, it was the one that came up with the idea that the ramp only came up about a quarter of the way, making it understandable. And then everything above that point got built up from there, and there's corkscrew internal ramps going all the way up and having certain landing areas that are going on here. And what we were looking at before with that one socket is a landing area, and it looks like what we're looking at whenever we look at the side of it, you see the corkscrews go around and there's layer, 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 is much like you find in a Christmas, oh God, what are they called? Candy canes. And it's not wrapped up so like that, but it's wrapped around it in doing so. And then on certain corners, there are places where they would be taking and spinning around that sled and going up at a different angle over here and going around and up and around and up to landings, which ended up becoming not a landing as they built up more and more. And one would think that if this is the fact, there might even be a third one up there, but it has to be fairly small, that would be using this counterbalance, cantilever idea of how to pull up a stone that's a couple of tons. What you do is you put a cantilever stone that's on another sled here going down that's a couple of tons, and it just pulls it right up. Kind of helps that idea. Man makes machines. Of course, during this time, us looking back now is something, but looking back at what the technology that had come prior to them and them doing this effectively to anybody trying to understand it comes across as being magic. Just like I've shown you that all the Egyptians had an ancient plaster that's very much like concrete, and man, it lasts for thousands of years here. It's incredible. Well, better than that, I showed you that there's even concrete terrazzo floors in Göbekli Tepe going back to the end of the last ice age. And strangely enough, mentally it doesn't quite fit whenever you say, and they didn't have pottery. This is pre-pottery Neolithic, and they were at this level going on before someone had taken an idea and made it something out of clay. Almost like the clay was the cheap imitation of the ancient stonework. Anyhow, to continue here, and so Bob saw this idea that this guy came up with, and these internal ramps and so on. And now I believe Houdan has endorsed this idea of this ramp that runs up inside of it, much like this, that could encompass it. In fact, it made sense, and it makes sense now when I think of it, that, well, okay, you can get half the pyramid made from this idea, but you'd have to have another one on top of it to end up making the top of the pyramid. It makes sense that there would be a void there, and this may be the great halls of Amenti, or it may actually be something that's different, because you look at it with this idea here, when they go up above, because this is right above that grand gallery, leading up above that there, that's going to pull stones up above like this right here. You can take a look at it. But then how do we build any pyramid up above that? So you look in that light tan chamber that's there running down, and you'll see a sled there that's holding a giant stone on it, running up and over, and there's another giant stone sled that leads down, and it allows that thing to slide and pull itself up by virtue of its own weight. Kind of like that Shadoof idea. Kind of different than Herodotus tried to talk about, but I believe there was other methods used, and whenever they finally finished it off, they may have done a scaffolding with a Shadoof type thing, lifting up the final points of the pyramid or so on, but a lot of techniques are used here, and the crazy thing, like I was saying a minute ago, these are the first times these people are doing this and coming up with an idea of building a structure that's a machine inside of itself to build the structure. Imagine how amazing that concept is. And then they pulled it off to the point that no one knew or could figure it out for thousands of years. And there's some parts of it, which apparently we're showing here today, that really no one really knew about. But inside that chamber, you use cantilever idea, where inside of that you have sliding down ramps that are helping you pull up rocks from the other side. And again, now it's only the weight difference between the two rocks, and you're not having to pull up all of that. Still, there ends up being a lot of things that just don't make sense on it. Houdan has a new paper out showing you that he's got a revisionary idea on how his corkscrew worked up to certain points, because when they get to this point and then they build these chambers, has to be something different going on. Well, he's got these other little concepts that are there. Again, I'll try to put it down in the ads that are there, or the comments that are here. But it's called The Big Void Memoir, Khufu's Pyramid, and he's going off of utilizing this information also, which really only confirms the idea that there could be a machine up higher than that, and it makes it a whole lot easier to build this idea. You can use one machine to get it to the second one, and the second machine to build the rest of it. Inside of this too would probably be something like a king's chamber that he actually lives in. And it could be multiple rooms. With the way this Muon things work, it's not really perfected, but it is showing you an anomaly that's there. There's a bone inside there somewhere. You see what I'm saying? Well, the anti of a bone, there's a void. And it could be three side by side like this. I've seen ones that run three side by side but diagonal, like they step down and so on. And could this be the great halls of Amenti, and they put all these ancient pharaohs inside there that no one knows anything about? It's only one thing that we can hope for, because it looks like that they just gave away pharaohs willy-nilly, and when people were doing this back in the day, they didn't know who was what to when, and they sure didn't go around telling you, yeah, this is the pharaoh I stole, or where they got it from. Most of these tomb robbing people didn't even know what they were looking at, but they were just trying to scarf through it and get what they could. So again, this little bottom right anomaly here, showing you in the north face here, there's a corridor that goes on, Now that corridor, again, if it runs up at the same angle that it does with the Grand Gallery here, we have something that doesn't fill up that void that's shown there, but it leads up to it. So easily this could be the other part of the engine that makes the whole thing work. And it's showing up on multiple anomalies to the point that people are in concert with it. And one of the groups that they have it with is an Oriental team that's here, and that he's made the connection too that, well, you know, if we just look at this 3D or whatever, if this is the next landing that goes up and that landing went into here and went up, then this landing can go into here and go up. And so there's apparently something much like that. So people lean back and forth with whether or not it's a steeped Grand Gallery like this with these notches over here on the side that are built to hold that little sled up and then let it slide and go down. But it's grown in size, of course. It's 40 meters long, and then like 16 meters by 16 meters square by 40 meters. So this is not just some little square or, oh, it's missing a stone in here someplace. And there's an anomaly idea that it may not be quite as thick as that, or if it staggers like this picture is shown here, so on. But whenever you're looking at that new corbelled area that's there, it makes sense. And to the Oriental team, they say, I think it's more of a square shape. The cross section is an image of about 4 meters by 4 meters. So again, it's 16 foot by 16 foot. But what's the length of it there? Well, it goes at least 40 meters long. And whenever it does so, it appears to terminate somewhere right above the top corbelling that's above the King's Chamber there. So hard to believe that people have gotten all up in there and haven't found some little hole that goes right through here that may have something to do with it. But I don't think they built it originally like an ant mine, which is what that would convey. And if people weren't supposed to get back up there anymore ever again because the machine was already used, there'd be no reason for them to have a clearance going through or something like that to end up even having an egress where you could get in there, if you're following me. So pretty interesting finding here, but see, the Grand Gallery's cross section looks like this, and the grand section that we're looking across here, the big void that we're talking about, is larger apparently, and it's either square or it has a top on it that's corbelled at the top. Either one of them could make sense. In fact, the corbelled or roof type appearance would show that to be probably the one of the two of the choices. So isn't it amazing that we keep finding these other things about, and it doesn't appear to be too far off from if you were to try to excavate somehow through the top of the Grand Gallery by building a scaffolding up in it or so on, that you could do it. And these, it's a huge void here. 40 meters long. It's 120 feet long by 16 by 16. Think about something about the size of your living room and 120 foot long, or a half a football field. And one wonders at the end of one of the sides of this if there's not a King's Chamber concept again. Because it looks like it would line up with directly in the center of the pyramid there too, which is a conspicuous spot. And a few people, even this guy, have said, well, it could be separated with this little segment like here. It looks like somebody stepped on a little portion of it, or even staggered in triples like that. And it's something that they've seen before in the Red Pyramid. So this could be something that's like that. But due to all the anomalous spots that are shown here, I'm leaning with the idea that it may be mimicking the exact one below. And if it's that machine, then it is so. And once the other has been verified, and then they say, well, okay, here's an anomaly showing up on your x-ray, we need to look into it. If it was an x-ray of a human being, something living, they would know that there's a hole that's going up there in this connective. And we're looking at ancient Egypt, something that's important to all humanity. And I think we ought to take another look into it. Lord knows how long it's going to take before they maybe do a few more sets of this, or do other things before they try to figure out a way that they can see if they can even get to this place. But I've got an idea that because they have these shafts that are shown here that lead to certain stars and so on too, it's quite possible that there are other shafts that lead off that other part too that go in, and that might lead an egress right there. There's just got to be a whole lot of intensive looking at it, and then these people got to perfect this technology to the next level. And of course, when they do something like this, they've got to close down the pyramids for 3-6 months or do or whatever. And no one wants to do that whenever it's built on tourism and that concept, regardless of what they find. And in fact, if they found nothing really, or came short and then decided to stop, that it would probably not look good upon it. But because all these air shafts are shown here, like I'm showing you, surely these other ones have air shafts at the top part of that too, right? People just aren't aware of it because they haven't found the starting point of it or an ending point on it. And if that's in effect, maybe you can go right through there and find that idea. I always looked at this and I thought of that ancient line that comes out of Contact, that movie with Carl Sagan and so on, the movie Contact, that if what we're looking at the Great Pyramid is all that there is internal to it, it sure is an incredible, great waste of space, isn't it? Because they could have put more things in there. And the fact that they show you they put in a few of them, they could put in more than what's going on here. In fact, they put in these dummy concepts where, oh, ha, ha, you think it's here, you think it's there, and all that, to thwart tomb robbers and all of those situations. What if we end up finding out that there's more sections than this? Makes me think that they ought to take that Muon thing and take it to another pyramid and run in there and see what they show with what we know that's internal to it as far as its voids, and make maybe a secondary verification on that and being like, yeah, this thing shows up, but then looky here, there's something else, and if we come up here, it's right behind this wall, there's a huge void that's right there. What's inside that void? It may be nothing. And that would be kind of disappointing with all the hype and things that people have going on in their minds, is what could be in there. But in reality, it could have just a few artifacts and just a few things, and just a few things could probably set everybody on their ear on what they think that this was. Or there could be a big pocket in there and there's an old X-Wing craft fighter jet from Star Wars, and that would just blow everybody out. Or something equivalent of that, like a spaceship, and they ended up putting it up there, too. Anyhow, let me know what y'all think here, but those lines that you see that are going on here are real reminiscent of that idea of an internal and external secondary corkscrew. You've got to realize that they put a facade on the outside of this, so you weren't supposed to be looking up under the first layer of skin. Well, if we look real deep through incredible technology, through a mountain, you can end up finding voids that are inside of the Great Pyramid, and they're validated because the other voids are showing up too, so that's got to be a void too. And then they did it with that side one that's a smaller container area, and it has proven it also. Let me know what you think down below, guys. But pretty amazing technology here when they come into it, and showing you that they've got this huge anomaly that's there. It's really only been secondary verified and really confirmed. Now the question is, somebody's got to figure out a way that we could ever take a peek into that, I think it may have to hook up with air shafts. With the other shafts that are hooked up to the one that's currently there and what it hooks up to, when you have the machine doing the same thing up above it, it too would also have other shafts that hook up to it somehow. If we can only get a peekaboo, Let me know what you think down below. Peace.